Hi guys, so this is part 4 of the Transitions to Essay PowerPoint. We talked about the general structure of an essay and how to approach that, how it's similar and different to the paragraphs that you've been writing, how the paragraphs that you've been writing so far will make the body paragraphs in your essays to come. We talked about how to analyze a prompt and do some pre-writing, how to write a thesis statement using that X equals A plus B plus C format, and then what's involved in creating a rough outline and drafting the body of your essay. So now remember, we want to craft the introduction and conclusion after we draft the body. So we're now at that part, and we're going to talk about the introduction and the conclusion and what those are, what they do, and where to go from here. So as I mentioned earlier, the introduction has 3 parts. It has a hook, the topic / context, there's a lot of words for that middle part, and the thesis statement. So the hook is what grabs the reader's interest and encourages them to read the paper. If you don't have a good hook, your audience or your reader is probably not going to be interested in reading your paper. So you want something that's interesting to bring them in from the outset. And then the topic or the context gives them any background, any information, any general information that they need to know. You actually tend to use the tactics of a definition paragraph more in this part of the introduction than you do in body paragraphs, but they are good skills to know for body paragraphs as well. And then the thesis statement that outlines the purpose of the paper and provides a roadmap for you and for the reader. And we talked about how to do the thesis statement already. So now let's talk about, well, let's continue kind of, here's somewhere online, some good tips. This looks like the custom essay meister for writing introductions. So creating a good hook is really important. To begin with a statement that catches the reader's attention. Some common hooks are questions, insightful quotes, fascinating facts or more surprising facts, or amusing anecdotes. You do want to keep your introductions relatively short. You don't want these to be several pages long because you're going to get into the bulk of the paper in the actual body. Remember how in the narrative paragraphs, I told you not to start at the beginning of the story, to start with the topic sentence. Well, it's kind of the same principle. You're creating the background information in the introduction, but you want to actually get in the meat of it, like in those burgers in the body. This site recommends writing the introduction last because it can be difficult. Write it after the body. If you prefer to write the conclusion first and then write the introduction, you can do it that way. Since the conclusion is mostly recap and you'll have the body on your mind. But in any case, you don't want to write the introduction first. You want to write it after the body. So what are some types of hooks? Well, famous quotes are one that's really commonly used. Rhetorical questions, have you ever, are often used, especially in speeches. I don't recommend them as much in essays because we want to avoid you. Interesting statistics, metaphors, anecdotes, jokes, descriptions, or challenging a misconception. These are all common ways of drawing the reader in at the beginning of the paper. So to go into a little bit more detail, so here are some examples of hooks that you can use. If you could go anywhere for vacation, where would you go? That is a good hook, especially in speeches, but again, we want to be careful of using the word you. So you might try instead, imagine the perfect vacation. Then you're actually using the question, but you're not involving the word you. Interesting fact, Destin, Florida has some of the softest and whitest sands in the entire world. So that would be good if I was writing an essay about Florida. Famous quotes. Dorothy said, there is no place like home. I tend to think there's no place like the beach. So you're taking a quote that the reader probably already knows and you're applying it to your essay. Personal opinion. I think that the white sand beach of Destin, Florida are the best place to spend a summer vacation. That can be a good way to draw the reader in as long as you're not getting to your main point. At that point, because the reader may agree, and if they agree, they'll be like, yeah, I totally want to know more about this. And if they disagree, they'll be like, no, and I want to read on to find out how I can disagree with you. And then challenging a misconception, same thing as the turnaround. Most of my friends think a trip to Disney World would be an ideal vacation, and not me. If I could go anywhere, I would go to the beach. So the idea with this one is to start with an assumption you think that your reader is going to hold or that a lot of people have, and then immediately challenge it to draw the reader in. And it kind of works a lot like the personal opinion. If the reader agrees with you, then they'll want to continue reading to see more information that they'll agree with. And if they disagree with you, then they'll want to continue reading to find how they can disagree with you. So it kind of gives you a way to bring them in. So the next step is the topic or the context, and it goes by both words. So this is later the transition in between the hook and the thesis. It's what comes in the middle of it. And this is where you state the purpose of your essay and provide any background information, like general information that the reader may not know or information that sets up the essay. The length of the topic context part really depends on the individual essay. Some essays will need a little more there, some might only need a sentence. And it's really difficult to kind of give general rules for that because it does depend so much on the needs of the individual essay and the individual introduction. I'm not actually going to be going through an example of an introduction and conclusion at this point. I feel like this PowerPoint, especially combined with the revision PowerPoint, is enough information for you for 1 week. So we're just talking about an overview at this point, and we'll be going into more detail about actually executing this in future weeks. But because, I mean, we're not going to have to go into as much detail about the specifics of the different modes, the different types of writing, because they'll be on types of writing that you've practiced before, right? So a lot of the principles will be the same. And we'll be able to kind of build off that and just mostly focus in on these new parts in the PowerPoints, so that you're not having to review as much information as you would otherwise. And then this way, I'm not just doing a huge info dump on you this week, or not as much of one as I could have done. I'm kind of spacing it out so that it'll be easier for you to retain. So we're going to go ahead and jump to the conclusion. The conclusion, the purpose of it is to remind the reader of what you've talked about and to kind of sum everything up. So you want to paraphrase the thesis, and I do mean paraphrase it. Do not repeat it word for word, because then that just looks really lazy, and you don't want to do that. So just rephrase it in a different way. Then you want to summarize your main points. So you can do this by just paraphrasing your topic or your transition sentences, because ideally you'll have your main points in those spots, right? So you can just go back and take from what you've written, but again, don't copy it word for word, rephrase it, otherwise it looks lazy. And then the so what statement is the last part. So it's where you're going to leave a strong impression on your reader. The idea is so that they remember what you've written. And so you want to leave them with like a lasting image, a lasting impression. So what is a so what statement? It can explain why the topic of the essay is important. It talks about what's at stake or leaves a lasting image. It can do any of those or all three of those. So how can we do that? So let's say this is where someone took a mediocre so what statement and improved upon it. So the lifestyle of a teenager in the Middle Ages was very different from the lifestyle of most modern American teenagers. So what? Why is that important? What does that even tell us? So a better one might be, because of the relative freedom enjoyed by young people today, the lifestyle of modern American teenagers is very different from the lifestyle of teens in the Middle Ages. This is better because it at least says why the difference exists, but we maybe want to go a little further and talk about, you know, why, what's important here. So a young person in the Middle Ages had different expectations about marriage, family, and personal freedom than do young adults today. Okay, so it emphasizes the medieval, not modern teenager. It doesn't present the argument being defended here because we've already done that in the thesis statement. So we're summing up the main points and then explaining why it's important. So then that brings us to the final steps, which are the finishing steps. And we'll talk more about this in the revision PowerPoint, so this is kind of quick. So in revision, you want to first check for structural elements. So make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be and you have all of the things you're supposed to have. So make sure your introduction has a hook, a context, and a thesis. Make sure your body paragraphs have your topic, sentence, exposition, and transition sentences, and your conclusion paraphrases the thesis and the main points and adds on a so what statement. Then you want to kind of ask yourself some questions. So things like, is my thesis statement clear? Do I have both a claim and my main points? Is it in the right place? Does it match the paper? That seems like a silly question to ask, but you would be surprised how often people start writing papers and end up with a thesis that doesn't match the paper at all. And it's a lot easier to go back and change the thesis than the whole paper. So then you want to try and check and see, does your argument make sense? Hold on. So then you'll ask things like, does my evidence support my thesis? So in other words, do my paragraphs match what I'm arguing in my thesis? Does everything in the paper relate back to the thesis? And am I presenting my points in a logical order? After you go through these questions, of course, you're going to answer them, and then you want to make any adjustments that you need to make all of these, say yes, answer yes. So then you're going to go on to the editing part, and this is about kind of polishing things up. It's almost where it needs to be, but it's not quite there yet. So you're going to ask yourself things like, does everything flow? Are there any sentences or statements that are unclear? Is there anywhere that I could improve flow or readability to make it easier to read? This is often about adding a word or just changing a few words here and there at this stage. You're not making any major changes in editing. You're just kind of polishing up what's there. And then finally, you want to finish up by proofreading. So proofreading is when we're checking for those nitty-gritty things like grammar and punctuation. So you're specifically going to want to look at things like subject-verb agreement and verb tenses. You want to look at your sentence structure and your comma placement and your apostrophes for contractions and possessives. You want to check your spellings. You also want to look for any other conventions, such as correct use of quotation marks or avoiding you and your. And then at that point, you are done. You are done with writing the essay, and you are ready to submit it to me for me to grade. So that's all for the transition to essays PowerPoint. As I said, we will do exercises and go into more detail about some of these things in the coming weeks. I know it's a lot of information, and I don't expect you to have it all memorized after just watching this. This is mostly to just kind of help to give you a foundation to build on for what we're doing next. So I look forward to seeing your revised paragraphs and your discussion boards, and I hope you guys have a great day.